Motståndsforum har den stora äran nu att presentera Calvin Priest som är från Socialist Alternative and Movement for Bernie Sanders. Calvin är kampanjorganisatör för socialisten Kashkama Savant. Savant omvaldes nyligen till stadsstyret i Seattle, en valseger som betydde ett genombrott för kampanjen. Att höja minimilönerna till $15 i timmen. Och som Seattle blev första stad att besluta om. Varsågod Calvin Priest, welcome.
Thank you for having me here. As Eylem mentioned, I'm from Socialist Alternative in the United States. We've launched a campaign called Movement for Bernie that has been supporting Bernie Sanders' call for a political revolution against the billionaire class. I bring with me solidarity from the socialist movement in the United States. Many people globally are excited to hear that there is a socialist movement in the United States and have been inspired to see millions of people in the United States excited by Bernie Sanders' call for a political revolution, for a $15 minimum wage, for Medicare for all, health care for all citizens, for free college education, running on a clearly anti-Wall Street, anti-corporate basis, running as a self-described democratic socialist. There have been rallies of 15,000, 20,000 people, 30,000 people in Los Angeles coming to hear Bernie Sanders' left anti-corporate message. He's received massive support from young people around the country. In New Hampshire, in the primary in New Hampshire, 84% of young people voted for Bernie Sanders. I was the campaign manager of Kshama Sawant, the socialist who was elected in Seattle and went on to lead the fight for the $15 minimum wage. The victory in Seattle led to the movement for 15 spreading around the country. That movement is now a part of Bernie Sanders' campaign. He's running on a $15 minimum wage himself. The interest in socialist ideas again in the United States doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the crisis of global capitalism. The effects of decades of neoliberal policies in the United States as elsewhere around the world. The Great Recession in the United States has had a devastating effect on ordinary working class people, on young people. The period since the Great Recession has led the limited recovery that's happened since the Great Recession has nonetheless seen 95% of the gains since the recession go to the top 1%. For everyone else, it's poverty wages, it's stagnant incomes. This is part of a global crisis of capitalism. It's the same crisis that's led to the development of resistance in other countries, the same factors that have led to the rise of Jeremy Corbyn, to the head of the Labour Party in England, to Syriza coming to power in Greece, and to the gains that Podemos has made in the recent elections. Initially in the United States, movements did not erupt out of the Great Recession. Initially, the effect was stunning on the working class and youth in the United States, as it was elsewhere. It's with the gains of the recovery, of the limited recovery, that working people and young people have felt the increased confidence to fight back. So the idea that things need to get worse before they get better is only partially true. In reality, the confidence of the working class to fight, the confidence of young people to stand up, is one of the most important things that leads to victories and leads to mass struggle. The Occupy movement was created on the anvil of the Obama administration's failures for the working class in the United States. There were huge hopes raised by the Obama campaign, and those hopes, as they came crashing down, led to the mass movement of Occupy Wall Street. The same crashed hopes, the same neoliberal policies that have taken place over the past years have also led to the Black Lives Matter movement, which of course has been one of the most powerful movements against institutional racism and police brutality in the US in decades. The support we're seeing for socialism in the United States is unlike anything in more than a generation. polls now show a majority of young people in the US see socialism more positively than capitalism. Last year, socialism was the most looked up word in the online dictionary, which also speaks a little to the relative newness of the idea to many working class people and young people in the United States. There's actually a certain advantage to socialist ideas in the United States, and there's a reason why they've grown, support has grown so rapidly and interest has grown so rapidly. In the United States, there has not been a social democratic party that has come to power. Instead, it's been dominated by obviously by the Democratic and Republican parties. And so what that's meant is that there is no past history of social democratic parties selling out the working class, selling out the youth. And also as a result of that, socialism is seen as a new idea. It's a new idea to young people who are looking for an alternative to the failed system of capitalism. In fact, the support and the interest in socialism has meant that the Hillary Clinton campaign has not attacked Bernie Sanders as a socialist, because they've tested it out and they know, in fact, that attacking Bernie Sanders as a socialist would only increase support for his campaign. Sanders' campaign has had an enormous impact on young people, on working people. His platform of a $15 minimum wage for all, for free college education, for single-payer health care, putting climate change front and center and calling for a mass investment in clean energy, mass investment in infrastructure that would create thousands of public sector jobs, has led to him receiving more than 4 million individual donations, which is unprecedented in the United States. And in fact, Hillary Clinton is still trying to reach the 1 million mark. She's actually resorted to sending out email messages asking for $1 donations. It's not because she needs your $1. She's doing that because she's trying to boost the number of individual donations that she has and trying to lower the average donation, which, given her massive big business funding, is obviously a far higher average donation than Bernie Sanders. In spite of the fact that Sanders is nearly 75 years old himself, as I mentioned, he has overwhelming support among young people, with 80 to 85% supporting him in many state primaries. His campaign has also led to major battles within the labor movement in the United States. In virtually every labor union, where the rank and file have decided who to endorse, they've endorsed Bernie Sanders. In virtually every union where the trade union leadership, the bureaucracy, has decided who would be endorsed, it's been Hillary Clinton. And so a huge divide has grown between the trade union bureaucracy and the rank and file. This has led to significant victories, with the AFL-CIO, which is the biggest trade union confederation in the United States, being unable to endorse Hillary Clinton in the primaries as a result of the massive revolt in labor against Hillary Clinton and her corporate politics. It's been quite disgraceful, the role of the trade union bureaucracy, because it has led to significant majorities or pluralities of the vote going to Hillary Clinton, in spite of the fact that she is a Wall Street candidate, that she is a clear representative of big business, and she's no friend of labor. That the Clinton administration passed the NAFTA trade policy, which was devastating for the labor movement in the United States, and she supported that policy. So many people are probably aware that this week the Bernie Sanders campaign suffered a significant setback. On Tuesday, there were 5 state primaries, and Bernie Sanders didn't win any of those primary votes. What this shows is that Bernie Sanders' campaign is running up against the limits of running in the Democratic primary. My organization, Socialist Alternative, called on Bernie Sanders to run as an independent before he launched his campaign. We made the case that the Democratic Party is thoroughly controlled by big business, that it's a top-down political party in which working people have no ability to control the politics of that party, and in which the Democratic primary is undemocratically structured in such a way as it makes it very difficult for a grassroots candidate, for a working class candidate like Bernie Sanders to be able to win. But we weren't sectarian towards the Bernie Sanders campaign. And so what we have done, as I mentioned, is we've launched a campaign called Movement for Bernie to build support for his political revolution. But we've also consistently said that we think that Bernie Sanders should run as an independent. And so this past week, it's becoming increasingly clear to Bernie Sanders supporters that he's unlikely to be able to win in the Democratic primary. And this has led to Obama just yesterday essentially telling Bernie Sanders that he should drop out of the primary race. But it's clear that Bernie Sanders will keep fighting, and it's clear that his supporters want him to campaign in every state and give them a chance to vote for him in primaries and caucuses that have not yet been held. What we're calling on Bernie Sanders to do is to run all the way to November as an independent. We think that it's essential that ordinary working people have a chance to cast their vote for a representative of their interests and for neither big business political party. We think that he should call a conference to begin the discussion around running independent candidates all around the country, and to begin the discussion of building a new political party, a party of the 99% in the United States, that takes no corporate money, as Bernie Sanders doesn't, and that is completely run in the interests and democratically structured in the interests of ordinary working people. There has in fact been a huge positive response for our call for Bernie Sanders to run all the way to November. At many of our events, it's been the single biggest line which people have responded to with the loudest applause. But in reality, there is enormous pressure on Bernie Sanders not to do this, and he himself has said. He said that he will endorse Hillary Clinton. Our goal is to put as much pressure as possible on Bernie Sanders and on his campaign to try to push him in the direction of running as an independent, and also whether he does or doesn't run all the way to November, to raise the need for independent politics in the United States, independent of big business, independent of the Democratic Party, and the need for a political party of the 99%. As I mentioned, the interest in socialism has grown rapidly in the past period. That interest is at a relatively low level, and Bernie Sanders has popularized socialism as essentially Swedish socialism. Now, Bernie Sanders knows that socialism, that social democracy in Sweden is under attack. He knows that actually many of the past gains of the working class in Sweden have been already hit hard by the sellouts of the Social Democratic Party, by other big business parties in Sweden. But there is enormous enthusiasm for the gains of the working class in Sweden, for the things that have been won in Sweden. But Bernie Sanders doesn't agree about the need for a revolution, the need to get rid of capitalism, and for the working class to run society. And unfortunately, although he has called for a political revolution, he's not building a movement through his campaign. There are other groups like Socialist Alternative that has used his campaign to build the socialist movement, to build a movement on the left. But he has primarily an electoral approach. He could, through his campaign, as I said, call for a new political party. He could also create structures, a grassroots organization to help him build his political revolution during the campaign. In fact, to help him win the Democratic primary. It's a huge opportunity nonetheless, even though Bernie Sanders has chosen not to, for us to begin the process of building such grassroots movements in the United States that point in the direction of building a new political party. I want to talk a little bit also about Donald Trump, which is both funny and not funny. So Donald Trump, of course, has been an important factor in helping Hillary Clinton's votes in recent primaries. Working people are, of course, correctly frightened by the language coming from Donald Trump, by his right populism, by his racism, by his anti-immigrant language. And they're correct that he's very dangerous. There's a lot of talk about him being a fascist, and I'm not going to talk too much about this, but to say that he isn't a fascist, I mean, obviously there are elements of what he is talking about that do point in that direction, in a sense. He's much more like Marine Le Pen in France than he is like Golden Dawn in Greece. And in fact, unlike Le Pen, he doesn't have an organization behind him. There's not a right populist party in the United States of any strength at all. And Donald Trump is running as an individual, a very well self-financed individual. But the reason he's getting an echo is it's a right-wing expression of the massive anger at the establishment, at the sellout of the working class in the United States by the big business party. It's the same reason that the Tea Party had generated a surge in enthusiasm a few years ago and why it developed. It's the failure of the left to build that has created the ground for Donald Trump to make gains in this presidential election. It's also the failures of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to represent the interests of ordinary people. Both parties bailed out Wall Street with no strings attached. Both parties have carried out austerity in the United States that have had devastating effects on working people. Both parties have presided over the worst levels of inequality in the United States since 1917. So it's crucial that Bernie Sanders run all the way in the general election. Because if he doesn't run all the way, many independents, many Republicans who would actually vote for Bernie Sanders, who would vote for Bernie Sanders because they can see that Bernie Sanders is representing the interests of working class people, many of those people won't vote for Hillary Clinton. There's a myth, actually, and this is a myth, of course, the Clinton campaign seeks to spread as far and as wide as possible, that she's the best candidate to run against Donald Trump. It's not true at all, and in fact, there has been poll after poll after poll over the course of this campaign, and to my knowledge, not one of them has shown Hillary Clinton to do better in a head-to-head contest against Donald Trump, or in fact against any of the Republican candidates. Every one of those polls has shown that Bernie Sanders does better against the Republicans. So it's crucial that Sanders take his campaign to the general election so that the anti-establishment vote that would go to Donald Trump for people who won't vote for Hillary Clinton can be expressed in a left direction. Because if that anti-establishment vote goes to Donald Trump, it will strengthen right populism in the United States. So we also think, we recognize that many people, if Hillary Clinton wins the primary, will vote for Hillary Clinton to keep out Donald Trump. And it's completely understandable that they would do so. And so what we're calling for is that Bernie Sanders run all the way in those states where it's clear whether they'll go Democrat or Republican, and in states where there's a question of which way it would go, that we understand that some people will choose to vote for Clinton. We don't necessarily agree with that, but we think that progressives should discuss that over the coming months. But there are 40 to 45 states where there's absolutely no threat of Donald Trump winning, and there's absolutely no reason why Bernie Sanders can't run all out all the way until November. So many of you have, I'm sure, have heard about the protests that have been taking place lately around Trump's rallies. Trump's rally in Chicago was shut down. It was shut down by primarily Bernie Sanders supporters and Black Lives Matter activists. And this is a tremendous development. It's showing that Bernie Sanders' anti-immigrant racist language, anti-worker racist language has led to a revolt against that. And working people are wanting wanting to express themselves, express their anger at what's taking place in the Republican primary. There's also been a number of protests at other rallies. So we're calling Socialist Alternative, along with Movement for Bernie and the Million Student March, a youth movement, is calling for massive peaceful protests at all of his rallies. This is part of how we'll defeat the right. Hillary Clinton is not going to defeat the right. Corporate politics are not going to defeat the right. It's the organized movements of working people and youth that will defeat the right. So, I was the campaign manager for the Kshama Sawant campaign in Seattle, and I want to talk a little bit about that also. So Kshama Sawant was the first socialist elected in Seattle in 100 years. She was elected 2 years ago on a platform of a $15 minimum wage, on affordable housing and rent control, on taxing the rich to expand transit and fully fund public services and education. Kshama's victory in Seattle and then re-election have had an impact on Bernie Sanders' campaign, and it's likely that, in fact, her initial election in 2012 was a factor in Bernie Sanders thinking. We can't read his mind, but he was following our campaign, and in fact he called Kshama a couple of days after our victory to congratulate her on her victory. Our role in leading the $15 movement in the United States has also helped set the stage. And of course, as I mentioned, $15 is a key part of Bernie Sanders' program. But I don't want to exaggerate. It's obviously overwhelmingly the objective political situation in the United States that has led to Bernie Sanders running and to the massive support for his campaign. So Kshama is a member of the Seattle City Council, one of 9 members of the City Council. We were able to elect her with a massive grassroots campaign that Socialist Alternative was the backbone of. We had over 800 volunteer during her re-election campaign this last year. Because she's one of 9 members of a city council, rather than, as I know is more common in Europe, a city council of 50 people or 100 people, because she's because she's part of a smaller body, but also because of the politics of Socialist Alternative and the power we've been able to harness through building a movement to put pressure on the Seattle political establishment, we've been able to have an enormous impact on politics in Seattle. We're actually now the second party in Seattle. The Republican Party has for a long time basically been a sect in Seattle, as it is in many major cities. So Seattle has for a long time been a one-party town dominated by corporate Democrats. It's corporate Democrats who've carried out the attacks on public services in Seattle. It's corporate Democrats who've presided over the inequality in Seattle. The reason we were able to win election in 2013 was because we recognized the opening that had taken place in politics in the United States. We recognized from the development of the Occupy movement that there was a massive opening for working class politics. We recognized that, and we ran a program on it. We ran the campaign on a transitional program. We took up the key issues facing working class people and young people in Seattle. As I mentioned, the word socialist was not a barrier. In fact, it was a source of inspiration to many people that there was a socialist running for the city council. As I mentioned, we ran on a $15 minimum wage. We were able to run on a $15 minimum wage and have such a huge impact in part because of the movement of fast food workers around the country for a $15 minimum wage. In the nearby small city of SeaTac, there was a ballot measure that was running at the same time that we ran our campaign. We were able to strengthen the support for the $15 minimum wage in that city, and the movement for 15 in that city strengthened our campaign, as did the movement of fast food workers around the country. The re-election campaign this last year was a bit different. One of the advantages we had in the initial election in 2013 was the political establishment assumed that we were no threat, that a socialist organization would not be able to elect someone to the city council. And so they only recognized in the final weeks of the campaign that they might be about to lose, which gave us an advantage. But that wasn't true in this re-election campaign. Defeating Kshama Sawant, defeating the socialists in Seattle, was their #1 priority. And businesses from around the country funded our opponent's campaign. Of the other 8 city council members, 6 of them endorsed our opponent, which is unprecedented. Corporate Democrats in Seattle on the city council always endorse each other, or they stay out of it. But in this case, it was very clear. We had 2 of them endorse Kshama, 2 of the more left-wing members of the council, who we pulled further to the left over the course of the 2 years. But the establishment went all out to try to defeat Kshama. It was actually a very politically challenging campaign in many ways. We didn't have a demand like the $15 minimum wage that there was a movement around that we could base our campaign on. Instead, we had to take up the key issues facing working people, which were quite similar and have been similar over the past years. And that's the crisis in affordable housing in Seattle, and it's the regressive tax structure that has overwhelmingly the costs of public services, of social services, of transit, of education, falling on the backs of working people. We have the most backward regressive tax structure in Washington State of any state in the United States. And so we campaigned on a platform of rent control, which this is a discussion that we started. We started it in 2013, we campaigned on it the following year, and we made it central to our campaign this last year. But it was quite challenging because there are a number of barriers to winning rent control in Seattle. And so we had to approach it in a tactically careful way. But we organized a series of public events around affordable housing and rent control. We organized a launch rally for our campaign where we had 1,000 people come and hear Kshama speak. We had Chris Hedges, many of you probably know Chris Hedges, come and speak at the event also. He's a left-wing journalist in the United States. We had Jill Stein, who's running on the Green Party presidential ticket, come and speak at our rally. It had a huge impact. We had a debate on rent control that had 1,000 people attended also. We organized with some of the left Democrats who were also running the election to challenge the corporate Democrats on the city council, a series of events. We worked together with them to develop a common platform for affordable housing, and we organized a rally around that. We organized a press conference around that. We turned the election in Seattle, it wasn't just our election, we turned the whole election in Seattle to a referendum on corporate politics, on the majority corporate Democrats on the city council, and we opposed them on a platform of affordable housing and on the needs of ordinary working people to be represented in Seattle. And as I said, we had a massive grassroots effort. We had posters on virtually every corner in the city. We knocked on 90,000 doors and called over 100,000 people over the course of the campaign. We set a fundraising record. We took no money from business, as I said. We didn't take a dime from business, as Bernie Sanders doesn't take money from big business. But we set a record. We set a record for fundraising in Seattle. We raised $500,000 for a city council race. Now we recognize that capitalism cannot be reformed and that capitalism will not be defeated through elections. We recognize that it's movements of the working class and young people that will defeat capitalism. The Black Lives Matter movement in the past period, as I mentioned, has had an enormous impact on the political discussion in the United States. It has wrestled a bit with how to relate to the presidential elections. but recently, many of you may be aware, a young woman interrupted a Hillary Clinton rally to ask her about her support for the attacks on welfare, to ask her about her support for some of the worst policies that led to mass incarceration in the United States under the Clinton administration, about her comments essentially calling young black people super predators, although indirectly. This had a big impact on young people, young black people who are watching the presidential election campaign, looking at Hillary Clinton and looking at Bernie Sanders. Another movement that is, as I mentioned, had a big impact in this campaign is the Fight for 15. I want to mention also that Socialist Alternative launched an organization called 15 Now, which has been part of the fight in many cities for the $15 minimum wage. And right now, in Minneapolis, we're waging a Fight for 15 battle. We'll probably be taking it to the ballot this year. And I think likely winning a $15 minimum wage in that city. So what's clear from all of this is that the United States is heading towards, is entering into a new period of political turmoil and revolt of the working class and the youth. Socialist ideas are being taken up again by young people who are searching increasingly for an alternative to the failed system of capitalism. And revolutionary socialist ideas are once again inspiring young people and working class people to fight for a better world, a world based on equality, sustainability, and solidarity. Thank you.